So this is my part of the North Dakota Oil Trains case presentation. My name is Carter Hayes, and this is going to be part two of the presentation. Part one you should have seen done by my partner Brian McKnight. So thank you to him for doing that part. And this is my part. So a little more background than what Brian went into in his part of the case presentation is that there are around 300,000 of these defective oil trains in the American fleet still out and about, which is not a good thing. They should not have that many numbers. Second is that all of these cars are aimed to be replaced by a newer model by 2025. However, this has been in the works of trying to replace them for a very long time now, so it's quite possible that that might be shifted back even longer depending on new rules that could be implemented, talked about later in this presentation. These trains carry around or a little more than 10% of the U.S. oil trains supply, which means that with the trains doing what they do, being that they explode and basically cause a lot of problems, it means that the U.S. oil is losing a large chunk of the supply every time one of these happens. And since 2013, over 1 million gallons of this oil in these trains have actually been spilled due to the malfunction in these train cars and due to the malfunctions that were failed to be seen and have yet to be changed to a newer model, even though all of this keeps happening and they're losing lots of money due to it, considering that how much of these trains make up the fleet and how much of these cars are actually still in existence. Now, the train that actually does this problem is this old version of train car called the DOT-111, and it was designed. The design was a good idea. It was designed to be a non-pressurized, very cheap and thin-walled train car that still had the amount of reinforcement and the amount of pressure needed to actually transport oil like it needs to. However, with these thin walls, it led to lots of breaks and cracks, which means lots of loose metal rubbing together, which leads to sparks. And if you know anything, sparks around oil is not a good thing to occur. But the biggest problem, honestly, was the non-pressurized cabins that they were made of, because the non-pressurization was not a huge problem, but the problem came in the fact that because of this, they didn't have a pressure release part to the cars, meaning that this oil was under a lot of pressure a lot of the time, which made it turn into a vapor that ignited very easily and very quickly if one of these cracks in the walls or one of the breaks did happen to spark together, which led to what occurs with these trains exploding in small towns, or whether it be just the crew itself being hurt or killed, unfortunately, in some cases. And then the new train that they are hopefully going to replace these with, or at least replace some of them, was made due to rules that were implemented in October of 2011. And this new car is called the CPC 1232. And basically, these feature a half-inch thick wall on all sides around the car, which means that it's not going to break. It's going to be very durable. It's not going to lead to these cracks and sparkings of metals. And it also has a basically one side of it is a pressurized control valve that allows pressure to come in or them to input more pressure if needed, depending on what is needed in that situation. And each end is also even more reinforced to deal with heat and deal with more ruptures, because that was a big problem with the DOT-111, is that the ends would be the main thing that would break the parts that were connecting in between cars, such like that, the parts that were experiencing lots of stress. But now that these have the new half-inch thick walls made of basically pure steel, they're going to be very durable and not have this happen. They're also extremely heat resistant in case some tragedy does occur with heat in another car or something like that. They're not going to let that heat come into their own car and basically ignite the oil inside. Now, the problem with these rules of the new cars is that they were not reinforced very well. They were introduced and said that these DOT-111s were not a good train car to use. You should be using these CPC 1232s, but they were never actually reinforced in terms of saying it's mandatory to switch out these cars. And so most companies still are using the DOT-111s just due to the cheap and like easy to make versions that they are of the CPC 1232s. They're a lot cheaper. They're easier to get. They already have them, so they don't have to worry about buying and putting in new cars. And that because of this, companies aren't really replacing them that fast. The only times they're really replacing them is if a problem occurs or if they realize that they need to, which means that even though the goal of 2025, like mentioned before, is supposed to be when we replace the cars by, it's most likely would not be like that. If some new rules aren't implemented, it's going to be way later due to companies not implementing this new design because the rules don't tell them to, and so they want to save money and not deal with the new CPC 1232s. Now, the hope for the future, however, is that even these CPC cars are going to be replaced by this newest design coming out called the DOT 117, which in the short term basically takes these CPC 1232 and makes it even better. It's got 9/16, so just over a half-inch thick walls on all sides, making it that much more durable. It's also got both ends as a pressurized and pressure controller end so that you have even more control over the car itself, leading to less brakes and less chance of ignition and therefore disaster occurring with these trains. There's also hope from people in small towns around North Dakota and just honestly trains in general around the United States that the new laws will come through that'll make it absolutely mandatory to outlaw these DOT 111s, and that the 117s will, or even the CPC 1232s will become the mandatory new design to use. And that brings me to the end of the slideshow. Now me and Brian will be on Blackboard answering any questions y'all may have through the discussion board if you need to. And thank you for listening to my presentation.